Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back. Kellen here with Droid Life. So I've got in front of me three phones, and you probably know what they are: LG G5, HTC 10, and Galaxy S7. Now, if you're in the market at all for an Android phone at this time, these are really the only three to consider. Sure, last year's Note 5 is a solid phone still. Nexus 6P, still a great phone as well. But we have new phones coming to replace those, and then these have all been upgraded across the board over those. So in reality, if you want a phone for 2 years, these are kind of the three you're looking at the moment. So because that's the case, this is a quick comparison of the G5, HTC 10, and Galaxy S7. So when you've got these three megaphones sitting in front of you, where do you go first? How do you decide which is better, which is different in a good way, which is different in a bad way? How do you decide one of the three? Well, they thankfully for us have all sorts of different approaches to the way they take on a smartphone. But at the same time, they all still have really, really comparable specs, and some stand out more than others in certain areas. So I think that's where we'll start, is just with a specs comparison. So if we look, again, G5 on the left, HTC 10, and Galaxy S7. Now, all these phones were created essentially around the same time. Sure, the S7 came first, then the G5, and then now the HTC 10 is coming. But they all really have the 2016 specs that we're going to see from most phones for the rest of the year. So in terms of size, though, we do have Galaxy S7, which, I mean, if you're just looking on camera right now, it just looks slightly smaller than the other two. And then I would say HTC 10 is probably next, and G5 down here is probably the biggest of the three. None of them are necessarily large devices. In fact, they all have sort of dropped in screen size a little bit. Well, not necessarily the HTC device. It actually did go up 0.1 inches. But in terms of just overall size, there was this rush to the top for a while for who could make the biggest phone. And then this year we've sort of seen everyone sort of dial it back. So like the Galaxy S7, we still have a 5.1 inch display here. We have a 5.2 inch display here in the 10. And then LG went from 5.5 down to 5.3 because their customers told them that was sort of the sweet spot they were looking for. So it's kind of this thing where it went big, and then everyone's gone, maybe that was too big, and we're sort of shrinking back. So you kind of get this really nice sweet spot of a phone in almost all three of these. So when you pick each one up, you kind of can't go wrong here. But again, we have 5.1 inch here on the Galaxy S7. That is a Quad HD Super AMOLED display, and it is stunning. I mean, we're talking the best display I think I have ever looked at in my life. With the HTC 10, we have a 5.2 inch Super LCD 5. That's also Quad HD. Nice display. I don't know that it's as good as this. Obviously, we're still fully testing this, but I would just say I really love that sort of vibrance that you get on an AMOLED panel. Personal preference, just me. LCDs, you typically, at least the general consensus is that you get that more natural look and natural colors, whereas you get that punch with AMOLEDs. Samsung's really toned down all that overly done vibrance and contrast and stuff, but it's just still such a better display, at least in my opinion. But this LCD 5 so far is really, really nice. And then on the other side over here, if we can get this phone to wake up, we do have another Quad HD LCD from LG, and unfortunately, it's probably the least favorite panel I've looked at in years. My review units, I've gone through three different ones, and they all sort of have this greenish tint to them. And I'm just not really a fan of what LG's done here. Brightness in outdoor lighting is really, really not good. Whereas Samsung's phone, you can read in bright daylight, crystal clear. HTC 10 still working there, but so far I haven't really noticed many issues. So there's the differences in the panels. AMOLED, LCD, sort of bottom level LCD, probably upper tier LCD, and then really, really nice top of the line AMOLED. In terms of other specs, in the US, we have Snapdragon 820s in all three of these phones. This S7 actually happens to be an Exynos model from overseas, and Honestly, I wish the Exynos was everywhere. My battery life on this has been phenomenal. Performance has been phenomenal. It tends to crush the Snapdragon 820 Galaxy S7 I had in almost every single thing I've done. So it's unfortunate that Samsung mixed it up and didn't just continue on with their own processor, but that's what we have. So Snapdragon 820 is basically in all three in the US. They all have 4 gig of RAM. They all have 32 gig of storage with micro SD slots. With these two, both manufacturers are saying they support up to 2 terabytes of external storage, where Samsung is keeping it real and saying 200 gig. So you could theoretically go higher in these two. but really there's only 200 gig SD cards max at the time. So they all have 32. They all expand through micro SD slots. So no real change there. In terms of camera, so we'll flip over here. And we've got a whole bunch of different approaches. So Samsung, we have a 12 megapixel shooter with, I believe it's 1.4 micron pixels. So bigger pixels, more light, better in indoor situations. F1.7 on that, and it's using Samsung's dual pixel technology. With HTC 10, we also have a 12 megapixel camera, and this is the exact same camera that's in the Nexus 6P and Nexus 5X. Should have this on hand, 1.55 micron pixels. So bigger pixels than here. Ultra Pixel 2 is what they're calling it, f1.8. Really good in low light, at least should be. My tests sort of show that Samsung's is faster and better in low light. That doesn't mean the HTC 10 is bad by any means. We'll have more on that in the full review. So far, both are fine. Samsung's just sort of a step ahead there in low light. Over here, G5, we obviously have the dual camera setup. So 16 megapixel sensor and 8 megapixel sensor. 16 megapixel sensor, I don't know that LG is actually revealing the micron pixel size there, so probably typical. Definitely not the bigger micron pixels we're seeing over here. And then you also have that 8 megapixel wide angle shooter, which nobody else has. And the camera quality on the G5, I don't know that, at least to my eye, it's as good or as sharp, really, even with the higher resolution as the Samsung or even the HTC 10. But that wide angle camera, even though it's a lower resolution at 8 megapixels, is really fun. You can take some really, really cool photos with it. So I would say fastest camera, probably my favorite just overall camera here at the S7. HTC 10 so far seems to be pretty good, and we got some further testing to go there. A little bit slow in low light, if I'm being honest, but otherwise, a good camera, definitely not as quick to focus and things like that as the S7. And then with its laser autofocus, if you get anything even near that, you get this really obnoxious warning message that says, please don't cover this. And it comes up all the time. So camera's okay here. With the G5, I did like the 16 megapixel camera, what it was able to shoot. And then I also liked just the fun of the wide angle. This camera can be really fast. It can also be a little slow. It's kind of hit or miss. I know I'm talking a lot about the S7, but overall just camera experience, I think the S7 tops these two. And I don't even hesitate when I say that. It's just a more instant sort of camera experience with less screw ups. Whereas these two, I've already found myself taking multiple pictures to get a correct one. And this is one of those cameras, sort of like the iPhone 6 and 6S cameras are, where you just snap and you know you're probably got a good picture. So that's sort of the camera setup on the back. In terms of other stats, so we do have single firing speakers on the G5 and S7. So if we flip these over, here is your single firing bottom face speaker on the S7. Not really a great external speaker experience. On the G5, same deal. One speaker on the bottom, not exactly something I would brag to anyone about having. On the HTC 10, we do have a speaker down here on the bottom, but we also have a secondary speaker up here on the top where the earpiece is. So it also works as an external speaker. So you have tweeter here, sort of a subwoofer experience down here. So it's not that that stereo surround sound like you would get maybe with the Nexus 6P, but you do have two external speakers and a much better external audio experience than what you would see with those other two phones. So in terms of just speakers, you got to go HTC 10 almost always. And it's been that way for years, right? They had the boom sound front facing speakers on a number of phones. This is also hi-fi certified. So audio jack output, you're going to get one of the better audio experiences. Although LG and Samsung have done some stuff there in years past that have been good as well. But the HTC 10, they're bragging about it nonstop about the audio experience. If you're an audiophile, the HTC 10 is probably a device you should strongly consider. In terms of other things, so if we just kind of take a little tour here, so Galaxy S7, there's that speaker again, but you have a micro USB port here, and that is USB 2.0, although in the Exynos, I think the Exynos has as well, but it has fast charging for sure, but the Snapdragon 820 variant supports Qualcomm Quick Charge 2.0, which is a little weird because the Snapdragon 820 is ready for Quick Charge 3.0. You do have a headphone jack down here on the bottom. With the HTC 10, you obviously have the USB Type-C port. So again, the flippy floppy port, I like to call it, because you can stick the plug in either way. This is Qualcomm Quick Charge 3.0. It's also USB 3.1. So about as future-proof as you get for a port here. Then you also have that speaker again, noise canceling mic. The headphone jack, unfortunately, on this phone is up top. At least, unfortunately to me, I'm just a bottom headphone jack guy. So that is up top there. One thing to keep in mind, though, is JBL has sort of worked in partnership with HTC to create the first USB Type-C headphones. So even if you're a bottom headphone jack guy like me, you do have options in the pipeline where you could slot in headphones into that USB Type-C port, get a really good audio experience, and that sort of solves that issue. And I did play with those JBL headphones, and they actually sounded pretty incredible. With the G5, similar setup to the HTC 10, so USB Type-C as well, Quick Charge 3.0. There is, noise canceling mic and that speaker again, and their headphone jack also up on top. Now, with USB Type-C headphones coming, you should be able to use these on the G5 as well. Even though JBL is sort of talking about their headphones with HTC, I can't imagine they're not going to work here as well. I also should point out that you do have an IR blaster here on the G5, which is something the other two do not have. So a little bonus there for IR freaks. Let's see. So what else? Battery. So 3,000 milliamp hour battery here on the S7. That's obviously embedded. You can't remove that. Same thing here. 3,000 milliamp hour embedded battery on the HTC 10. And we have a 2,800 milliamp hour removable battery on the G5. So as you guys know, it's got this sort of bottom module thing going on. Push this button, it'll pop that out. And then you have a removable battery that you can swap. So far in terms of battery life, HTC 10. So I should say this. If we're comparing all Snapdragon 20 phones, so let's just assume this was a Snapdragon 20 S7, I think the HTC 10, at least in my testing, has sort of been the battery king of the three. The LG G5 has been fine, and that's 2,800 milliamp hours, so a little bit smaller. Yesterday, for example, I had a 3.5 hour screen on time with this phone and still 20% left. So really, really good battery life so far here. If we're talking Exynos version of the S7, it seems to maybe clean house and sort of take this category in terms of battery life. But again, this is an international model. So if you're in the US and we're a US site, this is not really an option for you unless you want to shell out $600 for an international version on eBay or something like that. But so if we're talking Snapdragon 620 models, I think the HTC 10 so far, at least in my testing, has been the battery king of the three, which is kind of a big deal. And again, they all have fast charging. The Galaxy S7 obviously has wireless charging as well, and fast wireless charging at that. So you kind of have the double experience there. No wireless charging in either of those. Let's talk fingerprint sensors for a second. So we'll start with the LG G5 since we're facing this way. LG G5 fingerprint sensor on the back. I'm a big fan of rear facing. I'm also starting to become a bigger fan of front facing, which I'll talk about in a second. But fingerprint reader here also is a button, so you can click that in. It also works in a capacitive sense where you can just put your finger on there and it will read it. It's fairly fast. I don't think it's the fastest fingerprint reader on the market, but it works most of the time, and I haven't really had any issues with it. These other two phones, we do have to flip over to get to theirs. So both have buttons on the front. HTC's is the capacitive style where you just set your finger on there and it reads it. Samsung's, you actually have to wake the phone first and then it will read your finger. So that's sort of that iPhone approach. This is more of that Nexus approach, as is that, where it's sort of a capacitive style. Or you could even go, this is more of the 1+2 approach, since they sort of did that first last year. The HTC fingerprint reader seems fairly fast. Put your finger on there. It does seem to kind of then wake the phone and then it reads it. It's not as fast, I don't think, as maybe the Nexus 6P. With Samsung's, it's fast, but again, you have to wake it first. But once you wake it, it's just instant. It is one of the fastest fingerprint readers. So why I said that I'm starting to come around to the approach where it's on the bottom is because if your phone's laying on a desk like this, it really is kind of nice to just be able to do that. With the G5, if you wanted to do that, you can't. So I would have to, as you guys noticed earlier, I had to swipe in my unlock code in order to get into the phone. So different approaches. I like these two approaches probably better than what Samsung's done, but in the end, Samsung seems to be much faster once you sort of wake your phone. So I can't really get mad there at Samsung. So what else really quickly? They each run different skins, right? So Samsung has their TouchWiz, HTC's running Sense, and LG's running UX 5.0, I believe we're calling it at this point. You can see all of them here. Let me crank this brightness down some because it's getting a little wild. Okay, so now it's down too far. All right, so if we look at these, there's obviously a lot of different approaches here, right? Well, these two are fairly similar. Their skins just look sort of bubbly and not all that fun, and they change the icons. And, I don't think any of us are ever going to brag about the skin situations that Samsung and LG are doing. They really sort of change, the notification shades, how those things look. They load your phone up with settings upon settings upon settings, and things don't necessarily look like stock Android. You do have on-screen buttons here. You do have capacitive and physical button combination here. So at least you get the on-screen experience there and you don't have it here. With HTC though, I think a lot of people are really going to respect what they've done here. I mean, they've kept it about as stock as it gets outside of their paginated vertical scrolling app drawer. But if you swipe down the notification shade, it looks like stock Android. If you jump into settings, it sort of has that stock Android look, although they've reordered everything and I'm still struggling to find everything. But, they took out duplicate apps. You don't have two mail apps. You just have Google's mail app. You don't have two calendars. You just have Google Calendar. So they've really cleaned up their sort of approach. And I mentioned this in my sort of first 10 things you should do with the HTC 10 video, where I said, it's kind of a boring phone, and that's not a bad thing. It's just a boring phone because it's not filled with all this garbage that you have to set up and move and disable and uninstall. It's just like a bare bones phone that has just this little bit of a skin on top that you can sort of then tweak to your liking. And look, they all three support themes, so they all have their different theme stores. You can change the looks of everything. It's still Android and it's customizable, but HTC's approach really, really, really refreshing for a non-Nexus phone, just to see somebody go so simple and sort of let the Google stuff stand up front, which is for Android enthusiasts anyway, like us, that's sort of what we really, really appreciate, right? So just in other things then, I would say, obviously you have water resistance here with Samsung's phone, and that's a big deal. We're talking throw it in the bathtub and let it sit there for a while and not going to have any issues. With these two phones, you don't really want water anywhere near them. And, that's not good. Like, for example, when I went to go pick up my HTC 10 this week, I was at a bar having a beer. I'm the idiot that spilled the beer all over the bar on myself and on my phone, which just so happened at the time to be the S7. So the waiter came over, was helping me like mop it up, and she grabbed my phone and started wiping it off and actually told her, don't worry about it. That phone's water resistant. And so it was fine. And I wasn't even worried about it. But if I had had one of these other two phones, they'd be dead probably. They would have been soaked in beer and done. So it's one of those things where I'm starting to feel like every phone should have water resistance, at least on some level. And these other two phones at this time just don't necessarily have that. Other differences, we have an OIS, optically image stabilized camera here on the HTC 10. HTC says it's one of the first. I don't know that that's a huge selling point, but it should take better selfies in the club. So they do have that. These two just have, I believe that's 8 megapixel and this is 5. This is also 5. But so you should get better selfies than anyone else with this one if you're big into the selfie game. So far, the last thing, I guess, then we can just talk about design in general. So with the S7 in hand, this is all personal preference here when we're talking design. This phone feels the best of the three in hand. It's just small enough. It also looks really clean. It's got, obviously this is a fingerprint magnet. You can see I've wiped this off plenty of times before the video started, and it is a disaster again. So that does drive me insane, but it's got the metal frame and the glass, and this is the silver version, which I think is really, really nice. This phone overall fits in my hand better, works a little bit quicker, I think, than some of the others. It's just sort of a phone I would prefer to use on a daily basis. With that said, the HTC 10, I mean, this thing is, the more I use it, the more it grows on me. And this is this isn't the most innovative design. It's not the freshest design, but this is a nice design. I mean, it's got this giant chamfer, which I thought I would hate, but in person I don't really. And it's got a little bit of reflective quality to it. This phone also, it's a really nice size. It fits really good in your hand. With my hand, not necessarily as good as the S7, but it's also one of those where I'm not struggling with it. I do shimmy a little bit to get up to the notification area, but overall, it just fits in your hand. It feels like a really premium, sturdy device. I do not like that this button setup is this way. I sort of wish the power was maybe on top and volume down here. I don't know. There's something there that's bugging me a little bit. but I'll get used to it. I just keep finding that I'm pressing the volume up instead of power, and it's just going to take some getting used to. But overall, this phone in hand really feels great. It looks nice. I would prefer the darker charcoal over the silver if I was buying one of my own. This is a review unit, but I mean, you can't. HTC did just a really nice job. Sure, there's a little bit of a camera hump, not something I would necessarily worry about. It's obviously got the USB Type-C port, and it's sort of future-proofed and things like that. Really, really nice job. Not a huge fan of the button setup. I wish these were on screen, but again, personal preference there. Overall, though, no big complaints. As for the G5, least favorite phone in hand. G5 review is out, and obviously we don't love this phone. It's a solid phone. It's a decent phone. It's just not a great phone. These other two so far have the potential to both be great phones. S7 for sure is a great phone. The more I use the HTC 10, the more I'm leaning towards it being better than good. So with the G5 though, it just doesn't feel as premium. Even though this is a metal phone, this soft touch back that looks like metal is mostly a coating of primer and feels kind of plasticky. This hump area here is not exactly the most attractive. Overall, though, it feels okay in hand just because it's so bubbly, and you can actually use it and not really struggle, and it feels okay. It just doesn't quite have that premium experience or feel that you get with the other two. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's been 20 minutes of me rambling about the three of these. Just there's a lot to talk about. There's three really, really good phones. I don't think you go wrong with either. I would just at this time say the HTC 10 and S7 are a step above the G5. They're actually a fairly decent step above. These two phones are probably the two you're going to be considering. S7 review's out, LG G5 review's out, HTC 10 review will be out shortly, and that's just sort of a general overview of the differences between the three. So again, you've got LG G5, HTC 10, Galaxy S7. Let us know what you think.